Good afternoon, everyone. This is Janet Hazelton, President of the Nova Scotia Nurses Union. First of all, I want to thank all of you that have taken the time to call in to have this conversation with us about the LPN recent reclassification. We will be recording this session, and what we will do as soon as union calling get it back to us, the file back to us, we will make it available to our members on our website, and so that you can listen. The reason we had one union calling rather than two union calling is because we want to make sure that we have the same message, it's consistent, the answers are the same. So that's the reason we chose not to do two, because then sometimes you might get different questions and it's just not as consistent. I want to let you know that on the call today is our Board of Directors. Included in our Board of Directors is Maria Langell. She is the VP of the LPN grad component. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the NSNU structure. So we have one full-time position, and that's the president. The president is elected at our AGM by all our membership, and that president must be a dues-paying member of NSNU. So they have to be either a licensed practical nurse, a registered nurse, or a nurse practitioner. Our second position is our first vice president, again elected at our AGM by our membership, and that person also has to be a nurse. As a matter of fact, I don't have to say it over and over, our board of directors all have to be nurses working in the healthcare system in this province. The third executive position is our secretary-treasurer, and once again, that position is elected at our AGM by our membership. And our membership come to our AGM as voting delegates to make decisions not just about the election of officers, but also any resolutions, any constitutional changes are all done by our leadership at our AGM. Unfortunately, this spring, we were not able to have an AGM due to COVID, and as a matter of fact, our AGM that we had rescheduled for the fall has also been cancelled because of COVID. We've been advised that gatherings of 200 nurses is probably not a good thing to have, and we wanted to give our members enough notice. The remainder of our board of directors are elected by the people they represent. So we have four vice presidents from the various regions. So we have one from the Eastern region, one from the Northern region, one from the Central region, as well as one from the Western region. Our IWK nurses, they come together once a year and they elect a board member to sit to represent the nurses that work at the IWK. Along with those individuals who are represented in geographical areas, and those people are elected at our AGM by the people in their area. So the Eastern Regional Rep will be elected by Eastern Regional nurses to represent the Eastern region. We also have three positions that are sectorial. So we have the nurses in long-term care get together and they elect a board member to sit to represent long-term care on our board. We have the nurses in our community, mostly VON, that come together to elect a nurse to represent the community nurses. And finally, we have representatives, the LPNs have a designated board seat on our board, and they are elected, that position is elected by LPNs to represent LPNs. The role of the board of directors is to bring, that we come together every 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on the time of year, to discuss issues that are going on in their work sites, in their workplaces. So, for example, the Eastern Regional Rep may take to us concerns that are happening at one of the facilities that she represents and saying, what is our position on this? An example of that would be a few years ago when there was conversation about making vaccines mandatory. I would take that to the board of directors and we would make a decision about whether that was something we would want to support or not support. Decisions are made by the board of directors on policy, on things about the running of the union. So decisions are made by your board of directors. Any policies that are made during the year, we bring back to the AGM to say, we had to make this policy, and now we would like you to either support it or not support it. The role of the board member, regardless of who they are, is not to be the spokesperson for the nurses union, but rather to bring information, as I said, into us to say. And trust me when I tell you, Maria and I have been talking nonstop since this LPN reclassification. Both she and I hear your concerns. Both she and I and the rest of the board understand the frustrations that the LPNs that we represent are going through because of this reclassification. But it's not Maria's job to speak publicly about this issue. It's the role of the president, and that's very, very clear in our constitution that the president is the spokesperson, and in her absence, it would be the first vice president. So I just wanted to make that very clear. Also, in the role of the president is I chair the negotiating team of all our members. So I chair the one for community care, one for long-term care, as well as the one for the nursing council. And that's in the president's role. We also have a designated LPN that sits on our provincial negotiating team. I want to be really, really clear. That does not mean that there's only one seat for LPNs. As a matter of fact, our community board rep is also an LPN. So this is not to stop any LPN can run for any of our board positions, but we do have one that is secured for them to make sure that that important voice is heard within our organization. On the call today with me is our Executive Director, Chris Albrecht. She's also our Chief Negotiating Officer. And I've asked Jill, who works with us, she's our legal counsel from Pink Larkin, and I wanted her to come on to talk to you a bit about what is a consent award and why was the NSNU not able to file a grievance like the NSGEU did. Today's call, like I said earlier, will be about an hour long, I hope, but if it takes longer, it takes longer. We'll go until we're finished. If you have not sent along a question, you can do so during the call by emailing us at nsnu.office@nsnu.ca. If I don't get the opportunity to respond to your question during the call, I will do so later today. But I'm going to make every effort to answer your questions and your concerns. It's really important to have this conversation, to review the circumstances that got us to the reclassification and look at a plan moving forward. Again, I want to emphasize, we know how hard all our nurses work in this province. We appreciate the increase in scope that our LPNs have, and we know that that increase in scope is no different for any LPN in the province, regardless of who you work for or where you work. We're very clear about that, and we understand that. Before we discuss the grievance, I would like I already talked about the Board of Directors. With regard to the grievance and subsequent award on June the 15th, 2020, arbitrator Lorraine Lafferty issued a consent award granting an increase of 12% to the pay rates for LPNs represented by NSGEU at the former Capital District Health Authority. The increase is retroactive to March 17th, 2014. Recognition for expanded scope of practice for the LPN was the substance of the grievance. I want you to understand that there are currently 4,600 LPNs working in this province in various sectors. They work in community care, they work in long-term care, and they also work in acute care. Only 385 of that 4,600 received this award. The remainder of LPNs did not. Those would be some LPNs within NSGEU did not receive the award. None of the LPNs within NSNU, CUPE, Unifor, or SEIU received the award. The reason I'm telling you this is not only an NSNU issue. It's an issue that relates to all unions that represent LPNs, and I'm going to talk in a bit about what our plan is collectively. All of our unions are working together to try and see if we can get this award for the LPNs that we represent with the retroactivity, regardless of where they work. We think it's critically important that we maintain wage parity. It took years to get it. We've had it for years, and we think it's very, very important for all kinds of reasons to maintain our wage parity. And we intend, with the other unions, to do whatever it is we can to ensure that our LPNs and their LPNs will get the 12% with retro. So now I'm going to give it over, the phone over to Jill, so she can talk to you about what exactly is a consent award and why didn't NSNU and all the other unions file grievances and get the 12% for their LPNs with retro. So Jill, could you please address those two issues for me?
Sure, Janet. So the consent award from arbitrator Lorraine Lafferty was issued as kind of the final step in a process that has been going on for the NSGU for many years now, that started with a grievance that was filed in 2014. And so that grievance was filed for LPNs at the time, LPNs who were at what is now considered, the former CDHA, who were represented by the NSGEU, were part of a healthcare bargaining unit. So they were not part of the same bargaining unit as RNs at CDHA. They were with the healthcare bargaining unit. And so the NSGEU filed a grievance in 2014, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why they were able to do that. But what happened was, without reviewing every step along the way, that led to an arbitration before arbitrator Bruce Outhouse. That decision was issued in the fall of last year. Arbitrator Outhouse found that because of changes to the LPN scope of practice and other changes that had happened at the CDHA, that there had been a substantial change in the duties and responsibilities of that role. And so that was kind of step one. And then when an arbitrator finds that a position has been substantially altered, then it goes to kind of a second round to decide, okay, so in light of that change, what does that mean in terms of what the pay rate should be? And so that was Lorraine Lafferty's role, was to decide, okay, so given that this is a substantially altered position, what does that mean? How much should the pay increase be? So that's the consent award. The fact it's called a consent award means that the union, the NSGEU, and the NSHA, the employer, agreed to that outcome in the end. I mean, they didn't kind of go in agreeing to it, but that's, in the end, they agreed that that was the award that she would issue. And so, but just stepping back to talk about how that process started, in 2014, the NSGEU, as I say, represented a bargaining unit of healthcare workers at CDHA. That bargaining unit, to go back even further, a couple of decades, had originally been part of the civil service. Some of you would know that a number of hospitals in Halifax used to be part of the civil service. If you worked at one of those hospitals, you were employed directly by the province. And so what happened was, when those hospitals were devolved, as they say, from the civil service and became kind of separate entities, the NSGEU's collective agreements sort of inherited the civil service language. And so when those groups started out, they had language similar to, or very similar to, what was for the civil service. And so what that means in terms of job classification is that they ended up with the civil service language that dealt with what happens when you have a new classification or a substantially altered classification that pops up in the middle of a collective agreement. And so if you think about the civil service includes a wide variety of jobs. If you think of, from people who are social workers who do child protection apprehensions, to fisheries officers, to provincial firefighters who fight forest fires, just a wide range of jobs, policy, desk jobs, admin jobs, everything. And so coming from that type of bargaining unit where you have thousands of people in jobs which are very different from one another, they had a robust system for dealing with job review. In the context of a civil service type group, if you had a substantially altered classification, you'd never be able to deal with it in bargaining because some little classification is just never going to kind of get the attention in bargaining. So you have this language that developed to deal with what happens when a position is substantially altered. And so that language was developed for the civil service, and then, as I say, when those groups left the civil service, they still had that language. And so that's how the NSGU healthcare group ended up with that language in their collective agreement. And then what happened is that they added language to make it quite specific. And so they incorporated language to directly refer to this job evaluation system called the Watson-Wyatt system. And it's a system where points are assigned, basically, in light of a whole bunch of different factors: education, responsibility, all the different types of things you look at when you're assessing the classification of a job. But they incorporated that particular system right in their collective agreement. And again, part of the reason for that is that if you were to look at the old NSGEU healthcare group, it didn't include RNs, so the RNs were in a separate bargaining unit on their own. But even though it was called a healthcare group, the range of jobs, except that they were similar in the sense that they all worked for a hospital, but otherwise it included not just kind of what you might think of as a healthcare job, as, of course, the LPNs, physio, OTs, those types of positions. It also included, financial services, graphic designers, people in health records. It's this wide breadth of people who have very different jobs, one from the other. And so what this Watson-Wyatt system does is that it creates a kind of clear system for assigning points and figuring out how to classify jobs. Otherwise, you have a situation where you get, say, there's a new lab tech assistant position. Well, how do you decide whether they should be paid more or less, or how similar to a job that is just completely different in the nature of the job? And so that's what they had for that healthcare group. It's not, they didn't have it, the NSGU did not have that in their RN agreement at CDHA. They didn't have that language for the LPNs at the IWK and the unit there. This was something that was developed specifically for that healthcare unit. And so all of that is the background to kind of the perfect aligning of circumstances that allowed this grievance for LPNs to be filed in the first place. And that Watson-Wyatt system is what really grounded that 12% increase in pay. It all is rooted back in that system, because you think of all these different types of jobs, and so all these jobs in the context of this healthcare group being assigned points, the outcome of that was a very significant number of points assigned to the LPNs that then allowed that consent award for the 12%. And so if you go back to where the other unions or other bargaining units were in 2014, certainly some other collective agreements had some form of substantially altered language, but nothing like this type of civil service system, certainly not with this Watson-Wyatt language, which is really what allowed this particular grievance to go ahead the way it did. I think, Janet, that I hope that addresses your question. If there's anything further you want me to add.
No, I just wanted to make it clear that we're getting a lot of questions why we didn't file grievance, and we didn't have language to support a grievance. So when you file a grievance, you have to say under article such and such. For example, if the employer said tomorrow, oh, I don't think I'm going to pay holiday pay at St. Martha's for July the 1st, well, then we could file a grievance because we have language that says you get holiday pay on July the 1st. The employer's not paying it. We can file a grievance and relate it to that article. We didn't have any such language in 2014 to now, where we had that same language that we could have filed a reclassification for LPNs. And not only did we not have it, None of the healthcare unions, other than that group, had that language. So none of us were able to partake in a grievance on that particular issue. Is that correct, Jill?
That's right. So this kind of historical holdover that they had for that group and just the kind of special circumstances that existed for the healthcare unit at the former CDHA is what allowed them to, and it's not just to file a grievance, but the whole process that unfolded, this very, very detailed review process. No, you did not have that in 2014. Now, I will say that going forward under the council agreement, you have not the Watson-Wyatt language, but you do have, again, a robust system of review of classifications available to you going forward.
Okay, thank you, Jill. So I just want to talk about, regardless of the scope of the consent award, we recognize, and I think all the unions, and quite frankly, most of our employers, recognize in Nova Scotia that the LPN scope has increased tremendously over the last several years. We know that medication administration, physical assessments, we have LPNs now in charge of units. Our LPNs in long-term care have a tremendous amount of responsibility, along with our LPNs in the community and acute care. So everybody understands that the scope has not just been for those particular LPNs, but for all LPNs. So I just want to tell you that NSNU, CUPE, SEIU, Unifor, and NSGEU, we couldn't take action until the award was granted. So we knew that this was happening, and I bet you NSGEU never thought it was going to go from 2014 to 2020. We all knew this was happening. We all knew that the reclass was happening. We had no idea even if it was going to be heard through COVID. Lorraine Lafferty decided she would hear it virtually through COVID and made her decision and published her decision on the 15th of June. I've been asked many times, why didn't we have a plan? Why didn't you see this coming? I can quite honestly tell you, I don't think anyone saw this coming. So we didn't know that it would be 12% with retro. We didn't know it could be 2%, 3%, 6%. So we didn't see any sense in developing a plan to address something that we didn't know the end result of. So collectively, we knew that when the award came down, we would be lobbying to get it applied to all LPNs, because for lots and lots of good reasons, we have to maintain wage parity in this province. We cannot have LPNs or any other healthcare worker. We have wage parity now amongst all our healthcare workers. We cannot have LPNs working in one facility making 12% more than another. It's just wrong, first of all. And secondly, we could have a nurse in our new collective agreement reassigned from Dartmouth General to the QE2, and she would be reassigned over there, she or he, and make 12% less. There's nothing, and no one can say that that is fair or right in any way. We have nurses working at Northwood just down the street would have LPNs making 12% less. Again, that is wrong. We don't want to get into a situation where nurses are saying, I'm going to go there and work in that facility because I want to make 12% more. It's tough enough to recruit and retain nurses in various places in this province without having that wage disparity. So what we've done, so lots of people are saying, so what have you done about it? So we had a meeting with the healthcare unions soon after the award came out, within 24 hours. We have sent out, I think, 3 campaigners explaining why we didn't have the ability to file grievances, explaining why we were where we were. I've done numerous media interviews. We have this union town hall. We have social media postings. We have web postings. We have letters. We wrote letters to every single employer where we represent LPNs, and that's over 40 employers in this province. In the letter, we asked each employer, please apply the 12% to the LPNs represented by NSNU. Do it now and give them retro. We have to write those letters. They have to respond to us saying no, and then we can file a grievance. We can't file grievances until they say to us, no, we're not doing it. We have heard back from a few of our employers. Some are saying, would love to if it was funded by government. Others are saying, we have a collective bargaining process, and we want to wait until that process begins. So it just depends on the employer what they're saying, but it's clear that until we get government to agree to fund the 12%, and we're asking for all LPNs, we are not asking for just LPNs for the Health Authority. We are asking for all LPNs, regardless where they work, regardless what union they belong to, and regardless who their employer are. We are all asking the same thing. Apply the 12% now, also give them the retroactivity. And I want to be really, really clear. All of the unions are prepared to fight to achieve wage parity for LPNs through any means possible. And like I said, we have and are about to file a whole bunch of grievances. Our communication staff of all the unions are working very, very hard, launching campaigns that you're going to see more of. We're going to have a letter writing campaign. We have, we're trying to arrange meetings with government. We're going, as best we can, please keep checking on our all various communications, and we will keep you as up to date as we can. I've already posted the letter that I wrote to the Premier. I wrote a letter to the Minister of Health. I wrote a letter to Brendan Carr, who's the CEO of the Nova Scotia Health Authority. I wrote a letter to the VON, and I wrote a letter to every single long-term care employer where we represent the LPNs. Those letters all went out last week, and we are slowly, like I said, getting the responses. I'll have to seek permission when I get a response to put that up on our website as well, so you can see what the employers are saying. I want to be really, really clear. They do, as an employer, have the right to say, you have to wait and bargain this. And the problem and the issue I'm having with that, and I'm communicating to the Department of Health, is we don't know when we're going to get to bargaining. That's unclear right now, especially like it's October that we are due to go back. But if we have a second wave of COVID, it's going to be really, really difficult to organize getting to various tables for long-term care, VON, NSHA, and the IWK. So I'm saying just give them the raise now, and we'll bargain when we bargain, because we don't know what the fall is going to bring and whether or not we're going to be able to get together. And I believe it's very difficult to bargain a collective agreement virtually. And I don't think they want us taking people nurses out of the workforce with the impending COVID second wave out of the workforce where they need to be there doing the good work they've done. Some of the interviews last week, I talked about, this has really frustrated our LPNs. It's made them angry. It makes them feel devalued. They feel underappreciated. And we don't need that, especially in these COVID times when everybody has a heightened level of anxiety, and that our LPNs and other nurses have gone to work each and every day, not knowing what to expect, not knowing about PPEs necessarily, not knowing whether or not they're going to take COVID home for their families. It's clear nurses are the heroes through this COVID, and we believe that you need to recognize the good work of the LPNs in the system. At the end of the day, I believe they're going to have to give it anyway to maintain wage parity. We can't have two different wage rates within the same employer. So the health authority can't have a wage rate for them and a wage rate for the rest of the LPNs. Community care they're very concerned. I've talked to several administrators that are worried that if it doesn't get applied to long-term care and community, they're going to have a bigger challenge recruiting into their vacant positions. So the argument is there. I believe at the end of the day it's going to happen, but I want it to happen now rather to wait 6 months to get it in bargaining. So that is what I'm saying to anyone that'll listen, and what I'm saying publicly. So yes, this week we are launching a letter writing and public awareness campaign. We have designated a web page on NSNU. It's called nsnu.ca/LPN Reclassification. And that's where you'll find the letter that I wrote to the Premier. There'll be letters there for you to write to the Premier, for you to write to your MLA, for you to write to the Minister of Health and Wellness and the Minister of Labour and the NSHA and other employers. I understand how upset you are. I've probably answered at least 300 emails, and I've answered every one that I received. If I missed an email, it was clearly by accident, but I individually have responded to each and every LPN that has written to me and some RNs about this issue. But it's not the unions that you need to convince to give the 12% in retro. We're there. We believe it. We want you to have it. It's not us that you need to convince. Ultimately, government has to make this decision. Government has to fund and communicate with the health authority and all the other employers that they're prepared to fund the 12% and the retro. So I encourage you to talk to the people that can fix the issue, and we're going to help you. Don't worry. We're there for you. All the unions are there for you. All of us are working hard on trying to get it, but government and your employer need to hear your voice. They need to understand how this is making you feel as an LPN working in the system, and how you feel you're devalued and frustrated and angry. All of those messages have to come from the LPNs to the elected officials. As we know, when you apply pressure to elected officials, oftentimes things will happen. And besides, it is the right thing to do. No one, equal pay for equal work. That's a pretty basic concept. And so no one can convince any of the union leaders that this wage rate should not be applied right away. We are asking government and your employers to do the right thing. The campaign slogan is same care, same pay, support for LPNs. You can download the poster. You can take a photo holding it and post it on social media. We are using the hashtag same care, same pay. We ask that you tag NSNU so we can share your posts. This will be like a virtual rally of sorts. If we get enough momentum, we're hoping. All 5 unions are doing the exact same thing. We have a new Facebook frame if you want to upload that featuring our new slogan, and you can have your profile picture saying that you believe LPN should get the same pay. I want you to know that I've been speaking to many of the employers, and as I said before, we've been sending letters to everyone in government. We've been doing as much media as we can on this. I was on Todd Vino yesterday morning, Sunday at 10. I did Sheldon. We saw CBC, CTV, Chronicle Herald. So, and some of your local radio stations in various, Yarmouth, I believe, and a couple of other areas where your local radio station called me. So now I'm going to answer the questions that were submitted to us. I'm not saying the person's name because I never indicated that we would publish anybody's name, and so I will not. We have grouped questions, so some have asked the same question, and hopefully we'll get to answer them all. One of the first questions is, why didn't we have a plan? And as I indicated earlier, we didn't have a plan because we didn't know what to expect. So we had a plan. We have a plan. I'm going to say within 24 hours, we met, all the heads of the unions met, and we worked together on a plan. We have our communicators working together, so the communication staff within each union are working together to help us do the right thing, to convince people to give us the 12% with retro. The first question is, can the government overturn arbitrators' ruling award or overrule with a different wage increase or make changes re the retro? And the only way government could overturn it is by introducing legislation. And as we know, the House is not sitting right now, and the Premier has been fairly reluctant to call back the House, because I've seen him being asked frequently about that, and every time he says that he's not interested. So that is the only way that this could be overturned. Why was the new arbitrator appointed? It makes no sense to us that a very lengthy process and Mr. Outhouse rendering his decision that the final hearings not be overseen by him. That decision was made between the NSGEU and the NFHA, so I cannot comment for the rationale behind that decision, but both parties agreed to have the new arbitrator appointed. How many LPNs are there in Nova Scotia? There's about 4,600 as far as I know. NSNU has 1,800, CUPE has 4, Unifor has 5, and NSGEU has 5. NSGEU has 500 or so. Those are approximate numbers. I could be off a bit, but that's what we found out today, or that's what we looked for and tried to find out. What is the process for dealing with this issue? Could it result in another arbitration to get remaining LPNs left out of the award, wage parity and retro? So there's a couple of things. Government could just apply the award. They could just make it happen. And they could say, tomorrow, give them the 12%, give them the retro. They could do that. They could say, they're going to waste, they're going to have to go, and they're going to have to bargain that, right? And would have to do that, obviously. Legally, that is the mechanism to get wage increases, is through bargaining or through a grievance arbitration. And as I said, we are filing grievances, and no one knows how long it takes to get a grievance. Like I said earlier, confident NSGEU did not think it was going to take 6 years to get an award. So I have no idea how long it will take. Do the unions have a timeline for rectifying this situation, or could it potentially take another 6 years? Again, I don't know. It depends on what route we're forced to take, whether we're forced to go through bargaining, whether we're forced to go through the grievance arbitration process, or whether they just apply it. Has the Premier and Minister of Health responded to the unions? If so, how have they responded? They have not responded, but in fairness, I think we wrote the letter late last week, Thursday or Wednesday. So when the response is received, we will post the response. We have heard, as I indicated, from some employers, and they've indicated we'd give it if we had it, and others are saying you have a process, it's called bargaining, we want you to wait till then. There are already job postings for NSGEU positions indicating a new pay scale. Do you think they will help speed up the process for wage parity and retro? We have calls with NSHA 3 times a week. Since COVID started, it was 5 times a week, and now it's 3. And we were told just this morning that they have not applied the new wage rate to the LPNs in the Central Zone. What are your thoughts on holding a rally? LPNs from across the province are asking for one and are prepared to come to Halifax to participate. We all agree COVID-19 will impact social distancing, masks, etc. That is something that would be in the communicators' agenda to talk about whether or not a rally would be effective. One of the challenges about having a rally at the legislature is, as I indicated before, they're not there. So we would be having a rally around an empty house. I'm not saying that a rally is not going to happen. That, like I said, our communicators are working on strategies to And that's what they do. That's their job. That's what they're good at, talking about what should we do to get our message across. Are we prepared to take this to court to fight for what is fair and right? We are prepared to do whatever it takes. We've already consulted legal option, and we're getting advice on the grievances, how to file them, and how to go forward with grievances and arbitrations. So we're doing the whole legal side, and so all the unions, like I said, are doing the same thing. I retired from acute care in 2019, but remain casual. Will you be fighting for retroactive pay for retired nurses? This would make a huge difference moving forward with my pension. Yes, we will be seeking for it to apply to all LPNs, and that time pre-retirement, and as well as the casual work you're doing post-retirement, we would be looking for retro for that. The LPNs that were working for CDHA in 2014, do we have a better chance in getting the retro more than other LPNs? I think the question, if I'm understanding it, is if I work in Dartmouth General, for example, I'm in the central zone, and those LPNs are also in the central zone. Do they have more of an opportunity of getting the 12%, the Dartmouth General nurses, or the Cobequid, or Twin Oaks? Do they get a better chance than potentially the LPNs working at the Aberdeen? That is not what we're seeking. We are absolutely seeking, we have to be very, very clear. We are asking for all LPNs, regardless of where they work or who they work for, that they get this with retro. We're not splitting up our message. We are not going to say except for, because that doesn't make any sense. Wage parity is wage parity. If our contract is up in October 2020, then negotiations should be going on now. How long can we expect this fight to go on? Have you spoke to anyone in government? Again, I have no idea. It depends on the route. If government does the right thing and has a cabinet meeting next week, and out of the cabinet meeting the Premier comes out and says, I'm giving the 12% with the retro, then we're golden. We don't have to wait till bargaining. But I don't know what the government's reaction to this is going to be. We have spoken with people that work in government, but they're not the decision makers. The decision makers will be the elected MLAs. A lot of us feel that there is a time for a name change for LPNs. We feel that there is no place for practical anymore. We are all nurses. We feel that licensed nurse is more professional and more recognized in the community. Can this be done? That is not a decision that would be in the realm of any of the healthcare unions. That LPNs are registered through the College of Nurses, and that would be their decision. It's a legal term. Licensed practical nurse is in the legislation, so it would have to be changed in legislation, and that legislation would open up the act, and the college would have to agree to that. Wondering about the retro pay. How reasonable is it to feel that we will receive this award along with wage parity, since we all work for the NSHA? And how long a process will this be? We believe that pay equity has to happen. We can't have LPNs in this province making two different wage rates. No different than RNs, no different than NPs, no different than lab techs. We believe everybody working in the healthcare system should, under a classification, should make the same wages. We absolutely 150% agree with that, and we're going to fight to make it happen, because it's not fair, and it's just going to create havoc in our healthcare system. I'm still new in the nursing field and don't understand why all nurses are not represented by the same union, and what difference between these unions, who they cover, etc. So there's a lot of history behind why certain unions represent certain classifications of nurses. And several years ago, when the Health Authority came together, and I believe that was in 2015, they typically there were going to be one employer, and the Premier decided that the nurses were going with the nurses union, and he was just sort of taking members from one union and putting it into another. The unions got together and said, Mr. Premier, I wish you wouldn't do that. We would like to still represent our nurses. We would still like to represent the ones we represented last week, and we would like NSGEU, CUPE, and Unifor to represent the people of the nurses they've always represented. All the unions said, we're not interested in taking on members that aren't ours. We would like to have a piece of legislation that puts us into councils, and that's what was done. So what it is now is we have a nursing council, and we have a bargaining team that negotiate the collective agreement that applies to all nurses working for the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK. We do it at the same time. All those nurses, we negotiate one collective agreement, and each of the unions will administer the collective agreement. We have the same language in our collective agreement. So what our Article 5 is Article 5 for all the nurses in acute care in this province, and each union administers their own collective agreement. So CUPE could have a grievance under Article 5 of the nurses bargaining unit, and obviously we meet, we talk about it, we decide as a group whether or not there is a grievance or isn't a grievance, and it's going very well. All the unions working together, and then there's 3 other councils, and we're in 2 of them, but not with very many people because we don't have classifications that fall into those 3 other councils. So that's for acute care. So that is, you belong to whatever union you belong to. We have mobility amongst and between unions. So that's the acute care. In long-term care, we have 40-some employers that we negotiate with together. So they send representatives from like Shanix, for example, would send a representative or 2 as an employer rep. Our long-term care nurses, they elect their team to negotiate the long-term care contract, and we go to the table and try and get a contract that applies to all our long-term care facilities. And finally, we have VON that we negotiate, and the VON nurses, they come together, they elect a team, and we negotiate with VON, the employer, with our team of VON nurses. So that's how the structure of bargaining goes. Do you have the option to strike? Show the government how valuable LPNs are in Nova Scotia. That would be illegal for us to strike because we have a current collective agreement with all our employers. So we cannot strike in between collective agreements. So it would be a legal strike, and a legal strike, when they happen in this country, the government can impose very, very strict fines. They could fine the union and the individuals. So this would be something that we would take it would be a very, very, yeah, I said it'd be illegal, I think.
No, you said legal.
Oh, I'm sorry, I said legal. No, it would be illegal. Sorry about that. Thanks, Chris. So it would be an illegal strike, which governments could say, I've seen governments say hundreds of thousands of dollars a day for the union, thousands of dollars a day for the nurse. And then there's the abandoning your patients, and it would be a very serious move for us to do a strike. Is the government able to appeal the decision of the arbitrator? No. It's a consent award that was signed off by NSGEU and the Health Authority. So both the employer, the NSHA, and the NSGEU signed off on the award. So luckily, government is not able to, in our view, appeal it. I do want, though, just about to the end of my questions, I want to say that this 12% is a good thing. This recognizes the change of scope for the LPNs in this province of Nova Scotia. It's a huge win, and thank you to NSGEU for taking up that cause for our LPNs and all the other LPNs. And it was a long battle, and the staff of NSGEU worked very hard to prepare for the arbitration and to convince the arbitrators that the scope has increased significantly. This 12%, like I said, only applies to a very small group of LPNs. But we truly believe that it's going to apply to all LPNs eventually. How and when, we don't know the answers to that, but we are all pretty convinced that there's no way we can have that kind of disparity within our LPN workforce. We believe that to be true. We think the employers see that, and we believe government's not going to have a choice but to apply it. It's just when they do and how they do. That's the question out there for us. But I do want to say this 12% is a good thing. It recognizes the hard work and the scope change of our LPNs, and eventually how we get there, I'm not sure, but we will get there eventually, and you should get the 12% that you so deserve. I'm not sure if I have any other questions. I'm looking at my colleagues here. What time is it? Oh, good. It's almost 4 o'clock. As I said, this will be recorded. It is recorded, and it will be up on our Facebook? No, our website. Colleen?
On our website, the webpage that you mentioned,
so
nsnu.ca/LPN.
So the LPN on our website, the reclassification section, that's where this recording will be. Please ask your colleagues that weren't able to join to go there and listen to it at their leisure. We understand there's never a good time to have a town hall. Nurses work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we just have to pick a time and do it, and hopefully people will listen to the recording if they weren't able to participate. I want to thank each of you that had took the time to reach out and talk to me about your frustrations and your anger. I hope that you will direct your sentiments to the people that are going to make the decisions about this, and that would be your MLAs and the Premier of this province. They need to understand how valuable the work you do is and how unfair it is that only a certain group are receiving this pay bump. And trust me when I say all the unions, every single union that represents LPNs are working together to convince whomever we need to convince to apply this fairly and across the system to all sectors, not just acute care. Thanks so much for your time. Please know that we are fighting hard in order to get this 12%, and we're all on the same page, and we've got your back, and we will be there every step of the way with you. Please watch that page on our website to make sure that you're up to date on what we're doing and how we're doing it. We probably won't have it up until tomorrow because we're timing it with some of the other unions, so that we're saying tomorrow that we'll have it up. So thanks so much for your time. Have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much for what you do for Nova Scotians every day. It is quite an honor to have the job I have representing such a great group of professionals, whether they're LPNs, RNs, or NPs. We have a great organization here. We have staff that are working very hard to make sure that business as usual, representing you, making sure your collective agreements are being honored. So this is just, we're used to having battles. This is just one more. Again, thank you and have a great evening.